All right, I've got a few comments and announcements to kick things off. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining the October program from the Association of Fundraising Professionals, Western
I can't hear anything.
North Carolina. Whoever that was, we can hear you. If you're having trouble, you might try logging out, logging right back in. That seemed to have worked for Jordan a moment ago. Can everybody else hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks everybody for being here. Really excited about today's program. My name is Ben Underwood. I am serving as chapter president this year. I'm grateful to be doing so. Thank you all for your participation in AFP activities. Few thank yous and announcements as we get started today. First, I want to thank our sponsors, UNC Asheville, Western Carolina University, and we'll have a special welcome from WCU in just a minute here. We're excited about that. Welcome, Julia. Also want to recognize the Community Foundation of Western North Carolina, AB Tech, the Community Foundation of Henderson County, and First Citizens Bank. AFP could not do what it does in the western part of the state without the support of our sponsors. So thank you very much for making our programming possible. Next, I want to enthusiastically point out we will not have a regular program next month. Instead, on November 17th, it is National Philanthropy Day in Western North Carolina. That's a big day for all of us. This year's event is virtual, but advanced registration is required. Over 100 people have registered already. We're gonna have a fantastic event, some pre-recorded elements, some live elements. I could not be more excited. Carrie Ann Chandler, who's on the call today, is doing a fantastic job organizing that event. And we're gonna recognize some incredible people. Let me make sure I hit all the key points here. More information at afpwnc.org/NPD, or if you make it to our website, afpwnc.org, you'll find it. November 17th at 11:30 is the event, free, but registration required. Because it's free, we ask you to consider making a gift to AFP's Be the Cause campaign in lieu of a ticket. Please give that some thought. And I just want to take a moment now in advance of the event to recognize the incredible people and businesses being honored. Two, in the business category this year, Prestige Subaru and Horizon Heat and Air are being recognized. Our outstanding philanthropist is Trisha Wilson. Eleanor Ashton will be recognized as our outstanding fundraising executive. W. Still Huey is our outstanding volunteer fundraiser. And the Summit Award will be going to Dr. Joseph Fox. The Summit Award is a Lifetime Achievement Award. So much deserved honor there. So please join us November 17th for National Philanthropy Day. It'll be a great event. I also want to let everyone know we are assembling the slate for the board for AFP for 2022. That'll circulate to the membership soon for a vote. We are searching for an IDEA chair. IDEA stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access. And that's an AFP term for work in that arena. And it's something we as a chapter want to get very serious about and ensure that our programming and our practices support inclusion and diversity, and that we are an inclusive organization. So we're actively recruiting a chair for that role. We have a job description written and we have a plan. So someone could come in and pick that work up and help lead the chapter in that area. If you are interested in that, or you know someone who would be a good candidate, please put them in touch with me. You can reach me, president@afpwnc.org. I'm pretty easy to find. You can also message me in the chat here, however you want to do that. And we're excited about our 2022 slate and excited about adding that role to our leadership. Few more comments before I'm able to introduce Julia. Let's see. Actually, Julia, if you're ready, I'm going to hand things over to you. I want to thank Western Carolina for being a leadership sponsor of the chapter. It's incredibly important to us to have their partnership and their support. And Julia is here today to offer a welcome to program attendees from Western. Julia is a public communications specialist in the Division of Educational Outreach for Western. Julia Duvall, thank you so much for being with us today. Please take it away and then let me know when you're ready for me to introduce Alex, our speaker today.
All right. Thank you so much, Ben. Good morning. As he said, I am Julia Duvall, and I am from Western Carolina University's Division of Educational Outreach. We offer a wide array of continuing education programs and professional development trainings, many of which have a nonprofit focus and are offered at our Biltmore Park location in Asheville. The AFP is a tremendous asset to Western North Carolina, and we are so proud to be a leadership sponsor and also to be a resource to nonprofits in our region and to help them cultivate personal and professional growth. Thank you again for having me, and I hope everyone enjoys the program.
Thanks, Julia.
Thank you.
I'm excited today to introduce Alex Comfort. Let me just take a few moments to do that, and then I'll hand things over to Alex. As you may well know, this is Ethics Awareness Month for AFP Global in October, so very appropriate for our topic today. And the name of Alex's session is The Ethical Challenges of All Positions in a Fundraising Shop. And if you saw the posting, you saw that Alex listed out all those positions because there are unique ethical challenges for each. So just a little bit about Alex. He's well known to us and well beloved, but certainly deserving of any intro I can offer and more. Alex is the president, he's CFRE, Certified Fundraising Executive. If you don't know what that is, talk to an AFP board member or any other member and we'll tell you all about it. He's president of Mountain Nonprofit Solutions, a consulting company he formed in 2009 after 23 years as a fundraiser. He specializes in working with all nonprofits for sustainability, capital campaigns, major gifts, agency and development audits, board development, plan giving, and endowment growth. Over the last 8 years, Alex has taught an acclaimed 4-day comprehensive fundraising boot camp at the Western Carolina Biltmore Park campus, where Julia was just mentioning. He served as Associate Vice Chancellor for Development, Major and Planned Gifts at the University of North Carolina, Asheville for over 11 years. In his 35 years of development experience, he's also been a capital campaign field director for a national firm, director of development for Covenant House New Orleans, vice president of the LSU Medical Center Foundation in New Orleans, and executive director of the Cradle of Forestry Interpretation Association in Brevard, North Carolina. Alex has been honored twice as Outstanding Fundraising Executive, first in New Orleans in 1995, and then in our own Western North Carolina chapter in 2010. He has extensive experience as a teacher, speaker, and writer about development-related topics. For the last 41 years, he's also been an Episcopal priest, serving both full-time and part-time in parish work. His capital campaign experience spans his development career, and he's directed 44 successful capital campaigns. And Alex's first book, Even a Blind Squirrel Finds an Occasional Acorn, was published in 2020 and is available via Amazon, and I highly recommend it as a catalog of incredible fundraising stories. So without further ado, I'm happy to introduce Alex Comfort to lead today's session.
Wow, thank you, Ben. I appreciate that. Boy, talk about defining an old guy. So the truth is that I've had a number of ethics presentations I've done over the years, and I've always done them with a panel. And I've never really had one where I said, I'm going to talk about ethics myself. So I find that I've got 4 or 5 points I really want to make in the course of this. But before I go any further, I should say I've added to my resume in a very strange thing. I talked to and fell in love with a group called the Asheville Watchdog, which is a group of investigative reporters here in Asheville telling the truth about a lot of things. And they asked me to be on their team, and I have accepted a part-time, time-limited job. So I'm actually working for somebody again. Mark Goldstein, I see you on the video. After you've been doing it for over 20 years, working for yourself, I did really well working for myself, and then I'm still consulting. But anyway, I'm working with the Watchdog for a little while at least, and I think now I'm supposed to look at you and say, woof. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is make some initial comments, and then I'm going to go through 8 positions on the fundraising staff. And then I thought I had a way to do this up front, and I'm not going to. I have a story to tell you that really is a personal ethical challenge that is truly not only, it's a war story, but it's also truly a life and death kind of ethical choice that sometimes we need to make. I'm going to do that at the end. Some of you are going to have to drop off, and that's fine, but this is just sort of a personal thing on ethics. And I think I share it mainly to illustrate the fact that even regular old people have incredibly difficult ethical things that come up. I decided to try and define ethics for myself, and I came up with a definition. It really wound up very close to what I found in the dictionary. Ethics are moral principles that govern a person's behavior. And I think the key word there is moral. When I go through the list of ethical statements about AFP, and everyone who's a member of AFP knows that we are all about ethics. We sign an ethical statement every year saying we adhere to AFP's ethics. A lot of them, those things that they list, are really good development and professional behavior. So I've really studied or thought about this, and I would say bad practice in a fundraising shop is not necessarily bad ethics, but bad ethics are always bad practice. Okay. I think that we live in people who are black and white usually, I think, have problems with the world because the world is full of gray. And as fundraisers, we have lots of times when we have to make decisions and the ethical choice is not clear. And so I'm going to be talking about that today. One thing that COVID has given me is an image that I want to share with you, and it is simply this. I don't own a face shield. I've always thought they were kind of cool, but I don't actually own one. But I believe that what we need to do in our professional lives is think of ourselves as wearing a face shield. And the plexiglass part of the shield is ethics. We have this face shield on at all times. People can't really see it, but everything we do and say is centered through that filter, through that shield of ethics. And I would just simply say, think that as an image in terms of how you go about your job. There are a couple of things I want to say right up front that I think are extremely important. The first one is, whenever you find yourself in a position where you are kind of unsure about what you're doing or what you're seeing other people do, remember the phrase, broaden your base. You need to find people that you can trust to talk to about this. This is one of the chief values that I've found as an AFP member for almost 35 years. And that is the number of times when something's come up for me and I picked up the phone and called somebody I trust and say, this is confidential, but I need to share this with you and get your impression. And so broadening your base, whether it would be trusted staff or other AFP members, is extremely important. And the second part of that is, as soon as you hit one of these things, start documenting. You've got to document everything in detail about whatever kind of crisis is going on. Now, I haven't told Ben I'm going to do this because I was afraid of what he'd say, but I'm going to talk about what I consider the elephant in the room for ethics in Western North Carolina. And that is the situation that's gone on at the Asheville school. Now, when that scandal broke, those of us on the AFP board had a number of discussions about what we should say or do. But the truth is that Ben handled it correctly. The newspaper finally called him about AFP's position. You may have seen what he said. It was very general, and it was full of statements like, there's a lot we don't know. But I want to talk about one thing that we do know. And I've got to say that I don't believe that there is any question that when the scandal broke at Asheville School, they internally came up with a fundraiser as their internal investigator. So you had a fundraiser as the internal investigator, and chiefly allied with that was her boss, who was also the head of advancement there. And I'm not sitting here today to poke at these people, but I am going to talk about the fact that this wound up happening, that two fundraisers were involved. That much I believe we know. And I've got to say that there is no possibility of any scandal situation in a nonprofit in which the fundraiser is not involved in terms of what is this going to mean for our donors. And because of that, a fundraiser must never, ever allow themselves to be put in that position. Okay? Now, nobody else is saying that. I'm coming out and saying it. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't even want to speculate on what the internal dynamics were as to how this occurred. But if you ever read my book, you'll know that I was highly involved in the Covenant House scandal in the early 1990s. And that led to actually my being involved in the United Way Bill Arimony scandal that came after that. And I will just tell you this, I do not believe in anything labeled an internal investigation. Just, if you've got something like that, don't do it, because all that's going to happen is an internal investigation is an action that is designed to protect the nonprofit and disclose as little as possible. I'm sorry, I can't see it any other way. A charity needs to immediately go to an unbiased outside investigation for a scandal situation. Just don't be a part of an internal investigation yourself, and try to talk your charity out of doing one. Now, let me see if any of you have comments about that you'd like to make. I want this to be as interactive as we can have it. Feel free.
I have a
Hi,
question
Alex.
for you.
Okay.
Oh, I just wanted to say, this is Robin from Our Voice, and I greatly appreciate you saying that. Thank
Okay.
you.
Mariama?
Hi, this is Mariama. Thanks so much again for speaking. You had started off your call saying there's a difference between bad practice and bad ethics. Is there ever a situation where one is unsure if it's bad practice or bad ethics, and that is when you are trying to decide if it needs to be an internal investigation as opposed to an external investigation? So for instance, if you think it might be bad practice, does that merit an internal investigation? If you think it's bad ethics, does that need to be an external investigation?
Okay, well, let me kind of back into this. Again, any kind of internal investigation, I think, is something to be avoided. And I'm talking about a major scandal here. We're going to be talking about all the positions today, but let's say that you find out that your grant writer is writing a grant and inflating some numbers to make it look better. All right. Now, I would say that's both. It's both an ethical mispractice, but it's also bad practice. You know, you don't want to do that. And I'm trying to think of an example of bad practice that's not ethics. Well, let's just say this. This is a simple explanation or example. The IRS says that I don't have to write a letter of thanks to any donor under $250. Legally, I don't have to do that. But I think it's bad practice not to write a letter of thanks to everybody. All right. I'm not sure it's an ethical lapse, if you see what I'm saying. So I would just say that when you come on things, just your thought process is, okay, is this an ethical problem? Meaning, back to my definition, is there a moral component to this? that doesn't seem right. And again, my statement to you is, if you think you've got one, immediately broaden your base, check it out with somebody, and see what they say. I've had so many calls over my 35-year career from people in AFP saying, this is going on, and you know, the guy offered me $3 million, but he told me he needed to be the board chair within 6 months. You know, that's a true story. And you know, and I said to the executive director that called me, I said, the funny thing about this is that call's already been made to 2 other executive directors. He called me back 3 months later and said, you know, you were right. I found the other 2 people that he'd called and tried to play the same game with. You know, think about that. That's hard to turn down $3 million if it's real. But in order to give him the position of board chair, it's not ethically very good. Okay. So I hope I answered your question, but again, if it raises the hackles on the back of your neck, take it seriously, because it's probably a problem. All right, now I've got 8 different positions I want to go through. And again, as I go through these, I want you to interrupt me if you've got questions or comments on any of them. And I'm going to start with your admin staff. To me, if you take a statement of what is the single position that we build our nonprofit on, and our nonprofit advancement program in particular, it is that we are going to take care and be ethical in terms of our donors. All right. The admin staff has a unique opportunity to watch what's going on. Some of them are doing data, some of them are doing, you know, just typical admin stuff. Some are doing communications, whatever. But I think every staff needs to be told, you are in a way our ethical front line. We want you to watch for everything you can see and make sure that everything is done right, done correctly. And that means if an admin staff goes to file a contact report from a major gift person, and the major gift person writes the narrative out. Now, I'm not saying they will know enough to know this, but one of my personal feelings is that all too often, major gift officers who have in a large organization a goal that they have to meet or not be fired, then sometimes they will pass up an opportunity to talk to that person about a planned gift when a planned gift is really the thing that ought to be done, because they're so worried about messing up their current gift, they don't want to talk about a planned gift. And I mean, I've lived that one and seen it happen. But the reality is, you do what is best for the donor every time. So when I think about the general staff, or the admin staff in particular, they're doing 2 things. They're watching what happens to the donors, and they're watching what happens in the office behind closed doors. All right. We've got executive directors on this call today, and you know, I love everybody's job and what they do, but I've also got to say the atmosphere in the office is very important. And so part of what the staff is doing is watching for possible abuse anywhere along the line. Anybody want to say anything about the admin staff or the kinds of things that they run into? Okay, let me move to the next one.
I have a question.
Sure.
So, and is that historically many organizations are hierarchical. If you're asking admin staff to be on the front lines and identify these things, what are some of the best practices you've seen put in place to make it not only a team agreement that we will bring to light things that don't feel right, but a safe place to do so?
I'd say 2 things. Number one, a constant reminder of this the kind of staff that we want to have fronted by the executive director. And the second thing I'd say is a constant reminder to broaden your base if you see something that's going on. I remember I had a time in Louisiana when the boss began picking on a certain employee, and the truth was the employee had some deficits, but the salary was not anything that was ever going to get anybody with more experience. And it really went from leadership to intervention to abuse in a period of about a month. And several of us noticed it and got the employee aside and said, we need to talk to you about what's going on. And frankly, the person needed to say, I know I need to leave. And we helped facilitate that process because that's where it was headed. So I think, number one, the kind of staff that does it really well is one that talks about it a long time. And the second is I've had people, again, to talk about it, and yet I've had bosses that had some kind of strange need to have some staff person in the doghouse at all times. And it was a very sad, unhappy place. And all I can say is that it can happen. I'll talk more about it when we get a little further down the road, but it's not good. Chad?
For those of us that are currently working for a small nonprofit and or have experience working in a small shop with maybe 5 to 10 to 15 employees that don't have an HR department, I think that creates a huge dilemma, in my opinion, if there's no access, for example, to like a board member or a board oversight or somebody. So what recommendation or, insight, for individuals that have a dilemma internally, but they can't actually report it to their supervisor because of the structure within the organization?
Again, with a constant message of broaden your base, I will share with you that there have been at least 25 times in my career I've worked with somebody in a situation that you described, and the main thing we did was got them out of their current job. You don't, a person does not want to quit without another job to go to. But
Right.
There are situations where you simply have to make a move. And I remember one time it was so clear that the person had to leave, and then when the person left, the abuser spent the next 6 months saying that the office production was down because X left the job and left us in the lurch. Which,
Right.
it was just unbelievable to me to hear this. And I don't like to talk about it, but I do think any situation, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, has a lot of this that goes on. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, the only door out is to leave.
Yeah, thank you. And just for the record, not within my organization, but also for those that don't have an HR department is kind of what I was getting at. Thank you,
Yeah.
Al.
Yeah, and most people don't have an HR, situation. And even then, I've been in plenty of situations where the HR was not a safe place to go.
Correct. Makes sense.
That's there are those places too. Okay, let me move to annual fund. Some places have a person that is the set annual fund director. And the things that I think annual fund directors run into ethically, the first thing I'd say is you want your stories to be true. The annual fund director, if they're doing the job the way I think it should be, is telling stories about the great things going on at the agency. And even if it's a compilation of things that you make up to show what's going on, the annual fund director has to keep it real. So going completely off the wall is unethical and need to watch out for it. The other thing the annual fund person needs to do and watch out for is finding out what the special situations are in the database, the donor situations, and getting those down on paper. Excuse me, that is so old school. Get it down in the record of the database. All right, so that's probably on Blackbaud or something like that. But the reality is every one of us needs to have the understanding that we could be run over by a truck tomorrow. And everything we're carrying around in our head needs to be conveyed in the database so that others can learn from it. And I remember one consulting thing I did, and we were getting ready to actually reach out, and I found an old piece of paper that was some notes from a major gift officer, and it said, never allow a female fundraiser to go see this man by herself. Oh, good to know. Sorry to say it for the donor, but that was very important information to know. And unfortunately, that kind of thing comes up, and the annual fund person, if they find out that there's anything at all in terms of needs or whatever, that needs to go in the record. Okay, anything about annual fund that you all would like to mention?
Alex, I wonder, I'd love to get your thoughts on, particularly with that example you just shared. Certainly you want to do everything you can do to protect your staff members. What would my inclination in that moment, hearing that story, is to say, well, that's a donor we want to back away from. We don't want to work with the donor.
That can be, and all I can say is that every one of us has a decision on whether or not to accept money from some person or institution. Sometimes we don't do it. Sometimes it's in the shade of gray that we can say, well, let's just take two people, two males, or a male and a female, and go visit this person and go ahead and take the gift. I got to tell you, it's my whole career, I have been faced with a lot of people who in real life, I wouldn't say I'd like to spend a lot of time with and be friends with, because they were not the kind of ethical person I'd like to be associated with. But they've been in my donor base, and I've gone to see them and gotten money, and been able to do the good work I was doing in my agency, even though I didn't particularly like it. And if somebody says that their personal style is they'll never take money from anybody they have any problem with, I'll cheer for you. Okay, that's great. But that's a decision you have to make. Father Bruce Ritter, who was the source of the Covenant House scandal back in the late 80s and early 90s, he founded Covenant House, Teenagers on the Street. It was a fabulous organization all over the world, and he refused to take money from pimps. Okay, fine. We found out later that some of his personal activities were such that he wasn't the kind of guy we were too happy with in terms of his own ethics. But he'd made that decision, and you got to say, okay. I mean, when I was at Covenant House and Seagram 7 called me, I was in New Orleans, and they said, we're based in New York, but we want to come to town and do a beer and billiards event for you. And we'll give you $2,000. I said, well, okay, every one of our 100 young people in residence is struggling with substance abuse, and beer and billiards is not really going to be our thing. The guy blew a gasket. He started yelling, and he said, blank, 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 if I offered you $2 million, you'd sure take it. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, an offer of $2 million gets me to at least bring it to the board and let them tell you no. You know, so yeah, I turned that one down. Okay.
Alex,
Yeah.
question for you. Would you advise boards thinking through what the guidelines are for for like the types of institutions and the types of individuals they would like to not receive gifts from?
Yes, this is called a gift acceptance policy. And you can, I think, Google gift acceptance policies and find some great ones to model yours after, and every board should have one. In particular, what you're worried about is the ethical situation where somebody offers you a piece of land and you accept the land and then later find out it's a Superfund dump site, at which point you are responsible for cleaning up. And the famous example of that was a charity in Chicago with a $13 million annual budget. They accepted a Superfund site and went out of business because of it. So you need a gift acceptance policy. There are a lot of good ones around. You can get on the AFP website and find them. But the board needs to have this, and in it you say, we reserve the right to decline any gift for what we deem are personal or moral or ethical reasons. Okay. So, and the other thing is, it's a wonderful thing to do, to give to that happy board member who won't help you with fundraising, but will help you with something like that. Find another job for them. Don't worry about them. Okay, so I think getting a gift acceptance policy is something that everyone should have. I will say that one time, Kim, I don't know if Kim Hinkleman is still on the line, but she asked me to look over their gift acceptance policy, which was 87 pages long. Okay, and when I did, what I found was that you know, go figure, an attorney wrote it, and it was all kinds of stuff on gifts I wouldn't accept, but it was written so that the board could lift out 3 or 4 pages and give it to the donor to say, this is from our policy. And so a lot of it was the same stuff stuck in different locations. And I said, I wouldn't touch it. But, you know, a gift acceptance policy is very important to have. Okay.
But Alex, hey, Alex.
Yes. Oh, there you are. Hi.
I'm here. In my own defense, we got it from 8,700 pages down to about 60.
Okay, good. Congratulations. Well, I didn't help you with it, but I'm.
No, I just want to affirm that there's nothing more important than having that kind of document, because it backs up your work as a professional, but it gives the board the bones to make really important decisions and then back you up as well in difficult situations.
Okay, I'll add on to that, because something else that Kim did, which I thought was really important, I believe this is true, is that when Kim came into Pardee Hospital, there were about, I don't know, there were a lot of different styles of naming buildings and doors and recognitions and this kind of thing. And she went throughout the hospital and made them standardize it so that it all looked good. But I even wrote a policy for naming opportunities for an institution that I think the board should adopt, so that it's very clear. Okay. And this is all, I think, ethical stuff. All right, now I'm going to move to the grant writer. Okay. Your grant writer has a very hard job, but the first thing that they struggle with is, okay, what do I do about the numbers? Maybe they should look a little better. I've already said you got to be careful not to fudge the numbers. The second thing is, well, what do we do when we grant writers have to have numbers? The deadline is approaching, and those nice program people up in the finance office or wherever just won't get to giving us the numbers. Should I estimate the numbers and stick them in and just hope they're close? All right, I'm against that. Maybe somebody can say, yeah, that's, sometimes you have to do that. But I've talked to a lot of grant writers who are pulling their hair out, and it's a thankless job. Good grief. I don't know, Mark, how you've done it, but it's a thankless job to keep that going all the time, with probably mainly because people don't give you the information you need. So you just walk away from the grant. Sometimes you have to. Something else is the grant person, I don't know who, but somebody's got to deal with the fact that in your grants, they're going to say, is 100% of your board giving? And you've got 3 board members that say, I'm not going to make a gift because having my name on the letterhead is gift enough. I'm giving you my volunteer time. I'm not going to give you $4.50. And so somebody else on the board says, oh, shut up. I'll give $5 for them in my name. I'll just do it for them. No, that's not ethical. So excuse those people from your board. You don't need them. All right. And then the other place where you have to watch out in terms of grant writing is again, even if you're telling stories, make sure that they're all defensible and true. Don't add anything to make it look a little better.
Hey, Alex.
Yes.
I'd like to unpack a little bit around 100% board giving. And I just wanted to maybe bring this up because I think as we look at issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and we expand our horizons when we think about the word philanthropy and what that means, perhaps we could have 100% board giving in a variety of different ways, and I think that conversation is going to start happening more, but especially if you think like I'm in human services, right? So I'm in a small shop, early childhood, and something that might be important for our work is having voices of the folks that we serve on our board, guiding our strategic planning and the services that we have. And perhaps they can't give it the same capacity that an investor person might be able to give at, so I think thinking about that, challenging that, examining that a little bit more is worth the time to question.
Okay, well, are you going so far as to say we will understand that their commitment of their time is, quote, the gift that they will be given?
Well, I think that further down the road, perhaps, right now we don't, I'm just kind of talking about it like theoretically, I guess, we don't, as an organization, don't say that time is giving. We have 100% board giving of investment, but it's just a question that I've seen in some different articles come up, so I thought I would raise it.
Yeah, and I'm a hardliner on it. Some of you may not be. Again, I think it's an ethical choice that you make. But the reason I'm a hardliner on it is because as a fundraiser, living the life as I have, generally with my board members all thinking they know more about fundraising than I do. When I say I can't put in 97% of my board giving on this grant without knowing it's going to fail. And if you, and I wasn't kidding about $4.50. If you make a gift of record, which I believe anybody on a board can do, we're not asking them to give $1,000. We're just asking them to make a gift then they are kicking me in the teeth and saying, we don't care about your problems and about that $50,000 grant, your $50,000 grant you're gonna fail to get because I didn't put my $4.50 in. So when people call me and say, we'd like you to do a board training, I say, okay, I'll be glad to, but you need to know what I'm gonna say ahead of time. And I don't take any prisoners, and I've had a number of places say, okay then, well, I think maybe we'll get somebody else. And that's fine. But I am for defending you as fundraisers and explaining to the people on your board and your donors how challenging your life is. So that's how I take that particular issue.
Alex, can I say
Okay.
something about back to your grant writing? Thanks.
Yeah. Please.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, that's really astute. I haven't gone to many ethics programs where grant writing has been specifically brought up. And I don't, in our work, we often get that situation that you were mentioning about not getting the numbers.
Right.
And it's a tough situation to be the grant writer in, as you said. It's there's a lot of pressure to not push, I think, by some folks that we work with. And I mean, it's in my experience, it's always been not that there's something unethical happening, but that there's just a lack of clarity and a lack of desire to get to the clarity. But that really opens the door for bad ethics, because when you don't have good records of the funds, and when you don't have good records of what's promised, and then the funder comes back, there's more and more pressure to try to meet the expectations and so forth, and to say that you're doing, what you've promised to do in the application. So, so it's important to cut that off, and we often put it back on the funder and say, this isn't just your grant writer saying this, and I'm saying this because, folks who are new to this situation, it's an easy thing to say is that, that the funders, they usually figure it out if you're just fabricating something, or if you don't have anything behind it, because they'll keep asking questions about it if they don't understand it. So it's just not smart to do to begin with, but it's just also bad practice. And when we've seen that, I mean, we just had one of our clients just hired a fund accountant because they didn't have an accountant who was doing that and who was doing a good job, even though they had tons of grants. And it was starting to get very, very sloppy and starting to make us really uncomfortable. Right. And so that's what we did, was we made this introduction and we said, you need this. And
interesting.
Unfortunately, they followed through with it, but that doesn't always happen. Yeah,
very good, very helpful. Thank you. Okay, we're running out of time, and I'll just tell you that I've got a few more things to cover and then tell my story. Any of you that drop off, feel free. I'm understanding this, but part of the problem is if you give Comfort the mic, you've got a problem. All right, so the next thing I talk about is the major gift officer, and I mentioned their goals. They have to be careful about sticking to the numbers correctly, and they also need to work very hard to be ethical about padding their expense reports. Oh, I'm going to Florida. I'm going to see 6 donors while I'm down there. I really need to go to this fancy restaurant with that donor. Well, be careful about all that stuff. I will tell you, never buy alcohol for a donor. It's a killer for anybody that finds out about that. The biggest thing here is when you are asked to get money for X, and the donor wants to give money for Y. And I would simply say that's the thing that I think they have to confront more often than not. Because if you have to say, yes, I need, and this is an actual case, I need money to improve the golf course at Dartmouth. And the donor says, well, I believe in scholarships. I'll give a scholarship to the golf program. And you have to say, no, that's not acceptable. We have to have it for the golf course. That was a specific example in which that person left, because indeed that's what the person was told. No, we need every dollar to improve the golf course, and we don't want money for a scholarship. So be careful. The donor is king, and you are the donor's advocate. And if your situation says, or if your executive director says, we need money for X, and we're gonna shift that money over, or they gave an endowment for a certain purpose, but we can shift a little of that over to something else that we need. That's what the major gift officers are finding. And I mentioned the contact reports being accurate for every one of those. Planned giving, the things that they run into in planned giving are the pull to not involve the donor's financial team, so that the stockbroker, for example, or the financial advisor, now name for that, stockbroker doesn't want to put $100,000 in a charitable gift annuity, because that's $100,000 less than they get to invest to increase the donor's assets and to increase their own fee. So I've had 50% of my planned gifts in my career killed by the financial team. Doesn't matter. I still have to involve the financial team and be honest about that, and arm the donor, offer to go with the donor to the financial team. I've only done that twice if I had that accepted, but to arm the donor with the statement, this is something I really want to do. Because I got to tell you, the accountants will probably be okay with it, the estate attorney will be okay with it, but the financial advisor is going to lose money over this and may not be okay with it. All right, so that's something to watch out there. Then the next one is, I mentioned, do you get a direct gift or do you get a planned gift? And so you got to do what the donor needs. But all right, so we're gonna work on your will. Are you going to tell your family about it? Very interesting problem. And more families in the United States, most of the time in our history in the United States, the parents don't tell the children what they're going to do with their will. I think they should, because it's bad. It leaves the family in turmoil afterwards. But more and more people are dividing the money up instead of giving the same percentage to all the children. And it leads to bloody fights and cutoffs after the person dies. But that's one of the ethical situations that you run into there. All right, the director of development, I've already mentioned a couple of things. The director of development, if it's a large shop, you want to be sure that everybody gets the same number of good prospects. Don't allocate all the best ones to this guy because this one's high performing and this one is not. If you see what I'm saying. So just make sure that because that's going to come up and be a problem. For the event coordinator, the ethical things for the event coordinator may be timing of the events in the community, so that if you're a great big powerhouse nonprofit and you find out the little nonprofit down the road is doing an event on X night and you put this, you use that same night, that's an ethical choice you're making, and you can grind that other nonprofit's event right into the ground by choosing the same date. So that's one of the things they run into. Often the event coordinator has trouble with being completely transparent about what various things are going on with their committee. So that's another area of ethics that they run into. And then finally, and I'm sure you've all heard this, the event coordinator is the one that has to follow IRS rules on ethics, so that if you have a charitable auction and somebody offers you a $200 lamp and somebody buys it for $200, they do not get a $200 deduction for that. Deductibility has come back into our lives a little bit more now, but just remember that that gift is only deductible for the amount over and above the fair market value. And I won't get it go. I hope you all know about that, but that's what the event coordinator runs into. All right, the executive director, I think, has two main things that they have to do, and there are a lot of other things. I've got about 9 written down for that. I'm not going to go into all 9, but they're 2. And I will tell you, these are personal with me, mainly from Louisiana, but certainly not with Pardee Hospital. But I'll bring some money in, and the boss will get me aside and praise me and tell me I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread, and then go to the board meeting or some other function and take credit for it. Y'all ever had that happen? That's tough. But all I can say is that for me, those were time to move on moments in my career when that started happening. And then also I've been in situations that were abusive, and I've moved on from those. And we've already talked about that a little bit already. Okay, let me stop and see if you've got questions or comments about these eight roles that I've talked about, and then I'll tell my story if you want to hear it.
Hey, Alex, this is Doug.
Yes.
Hey, I wanted to follow up on the comments that Chad made a little bit earlier, because I feel like this is probably more prevalent than most people would admit, that there are ethical dilemmas, oftentimes with leadership. And you are right. Usually the best option or the best thing to do is to probably leave the organization, but it's not the only option. And there are other options that you could take as an individual. You know, I personally have had to deal with this and had to resign from an organization because of how poorly the situation was handled. But another option is to report it to the board and see if you can make any headway there. You know, I actually had the place that I resigned, the board chair actually apologized to me when I left and said, you know what, we didn't handle that very well. And I'm like, yeah, you didn't. See you.
Thanks.
You know, bye-bye.
Yeah.
And but that's one option. Another option is to contact AFP, and I'm going to drop in the chat a link to the ethics form that you can complete to make a complaint. And that is another option for you. I find there are a number of cases with organizations where we are asked to do things that may not be ethical by our leadership or by another peer. And if they're insistent or persistent, then that creates an ethical dilemma for you. And now you're in the middle of that. So AFP will investigate claims of ethical violations. And there's a form, and it's the link to the form I just dropped into the chat for you. So that is another option for you if you want to pursue something of that nature. Another option is to contact an employee lawyer, or employment lawyer, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You know, some people just don't want to take some of these actions, but they are options that you can take. And then the only other thing I was going to mention beyond that is that whistleblower policies are becoming more and more prevalent and common in corporate America. I don't know how prevalent it is in nonprofit, but for folks that are not in a leadership position or in a fundraising position, that's a little bit of a dance to have with your leadership or your board. But I really encourage people. There's a whistleblower policy sample that I'll also put in the chat when I'm done here. But I just wanted to mention that to you. That would be a great thing for all of our institutions to have, is something where we feel safe in filing a formal complaint without it coming back to damage our career.
Wow, that's really good stuff, Doug. And I appreciate you doing that. I think one thing I say to people when they say, I've got a problem and I don't have any options, you always have options. They may be ones that you don't imagine taking. And some of what Doug tells you is, or has just told you, is sort of based on your success as an employee and the knowledge that you have some standing to fight. One of the options that you didn't mention, Doug, and is certainly there, is to walk into the head person's office, close the door, and have it out.
Yeah.
And you know that can be helpful. Okay, you're going to
Right.
put something in the whistleblower policy to also, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? All right, so here's my story. I won the very first draft lottery ever held in the United States in 1968. I was number 1 out of 366. It's also true that I was signed up for Air Force ROTC at the time. It was the only ROTC program, and I figured I'd rather not carry a rifle in Vietnam, so I went in as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. I went to intelligence school and was sent to the Air Force Base in Goldsboro, North Carolina. And I got a good posting. But there I was intelligence officer for a squadron of B-52s. And the mission of the B-52s at that time in the Cold War era was to drop nuclear bombs on targets in Russia and in the eastern part of Soviet bloc. So my job was as a targeting officer. I was in charge of making sure the aircraft got the bombs on the target. And each B-52 carried 4 bombs. We changed the targets every 16 months, but each B-52 had the 4 bombs and then 16 missiles that they would fire. So each B-52 had 20 nuclear missiles that they would, and bombs that they would take care of. And we had 15 of those planes. So kind of scary stuff, but that's the way it was. And so I was there for a couple of years, and I made first lieutenant, and I was holding down a major slot and this kind of thing. And one night I got a phone call about 2 o'clock in the morning, and the person said, this is a recall and this is not a drill. Those are the words that you dread, because then you know we're talking some big time problems. By the time I got to the office, I looked at the Air Ops building, which is right next to ours out by the flight line, and all the desks were being moved out on the lawn, and they were moving in cots for the crew to try and get some crew rest prior to flying. We had 6 B-52s on alert. And when I got there, I found out that all 6 were in the air. We are at DEFCON 2. If you all saw the movie War Games, it described all this in really very nice detail. But DEFCON 2 is the last step before DEFCON 1. At DEFCON 1, the planes flew to Russia to drop nuclear bombs. Now, what was going on was called the Yom Kippur War. It was a war in 1973 where Egypt on one side of Israel and Syria on the other attacked Israel at the same time. In the first couple of days, they succeeded. They took a lot of land. They got air superiority. And as you may know about the Israeli armed forces, they are some good. And after the first couple of days, Israel took back air superiority and began to win. And so they had, the Israel army had, I was told, 1 million-man army from Egypt surrounded. And so long about that time, Russia called the United States and said, this thing's getting out of hand. We need to send peacekeepers in. And the United States said, no, we think it's doing just fine. Whereupon the Russians said, okay, then we'll go in by ourselves to stabilize things. So they began to mass a huge army on their border to invade. The United States had no options other than go into nuclear war. what I didn't know until what we were told is that they were ready to invade and the United States had no option but to activate their drill. Now, I had a part of my job was putting a switch in a B-52 to arm it with another officer. I carried a handgun and the whole bit. And I've spent the 2 hours arming the other, 9 B-52s so that they could take off and fly around in circles until we hit DEFCON 1. So you can imagine the tension. Now, again, my job was using top secret maps and information to make sure each plane had the material it needed to track the bomb and the target, to get the bomb on the target. I worked with the crews, and so I helped them know how to do the bombing run. That was my end of it, from the initial point to dropping the nuclear bomb. So about 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd finished putting switches in all the B-52s and came back to the office, and somebody said, "Comfort, they're waiting for you in the commander's office." So I walked into the commander's office, and my boss is a lieutenant colonel. The wing commander was a full colonel, and both of them were there. And there was also there a general, a one-star general. We didn't have a one-star general at our base. And so I walked in, and the general looked at me and said, "Shut the door." And he said, "I'm General so-and-so from Offutt Air Force Base, SAC headquarters in Omaha, and I've flown in to talk to you. Is anybody else nervous?" Okay. And he said, "You don't know this, but you have an additional duty. You are the aircraft recovery officer." And of course I said, "Well, sir, what is that?" And he said, "There are 4 trucks outside. Each are loaded with materials, and each have an NCO driver that will drive you over to Raleigh-Durham Airport. And in 30 minutes, you're going to get in that truck and you're going to drive over to Raleigh-Durham, where you will recover the B-52s after they finish dropping their bombs." Now, I knew from the targeting, what have you, the B-52s didn't have enough gas to just turn around, fly home. So they were going to stop off at other places along the way, get refueled, and then come back after the nuclear war was done. But that's the point we were at. And I thought about it for a second, and I said, "Well, sir, why won't the planes recover here at Seymour Johnson?" And he looked at me and he said, "Son, we won't be here." And then he pointed his finger at me and he said, "Now here's the order for you. You are not to tell anyone that you're leaving. You are not to call your wife, your friends, or your family. You will drive over to Seymour or over to Raleigh-Durham Airport, and you will wait instructions from me." And there are 14 other generals right now giving the same speech to officers at all the other SAC bases. And in 10 minutes, I'm going to be on my plane back to Offutt. But you need to, we cannot have widespread panic at 4 o'clock in the morning on an Air Force base with people running to get out of here. And you are to agree to this order, and then you will leave. Well, I said, "Yes, sir." I went back to my desk, because by that point I had 27 minutes left before I got out. And in those 27 minutes, Secretary of State Kissinger worked a deal with the Russians and with the Israelis, in which the Israelis said, "We will stand down and we will go back to the borders that were there before we now have taken more land on our own. We'll go back to the original borders, and we will not go to war with Russia." The Russians agreed to back off. And what I didn't know until later was that they actually had a ship headed to Egypt with tactical nuclear weapons that the Egyptians were going to use on the Israelis. That ship had been launched. And so they turned the ship around. And the way Kissinger made the deal was to say, if you don't do this, if you don't stand down, then we will have to launch a nuclear war. And I'll tell you one thing, you'll never get another dime from the United States of America. Now, I tell you the story simply to say, even little old people get involved in highly difficult ethical things. And I will also tell you that my wife and my 14-month-old daughter were asleep a mile away from where I was standing. I don't know what I would have done. Didn't have to make the choice. We came that close to obliterating every major city in the United States and in Russia. And most people don't know this story. But it's always there. And I got to tell you, I left the Air Force and went straight to seminary. But the bottom line for me was that I was always very impressed with the professionalism of the United States Air Force and the way they did things.
Alex,
Be ready for an ethical conflict.
I hardly know what to say. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for your service. It's incredible.
Okay, thank you. I hesitated to share it, but I do think when you talk about ethics, it's true that we all have to realize there are ethics all around us all the time.
With that, thank you, Alex, for the session today.
Thanks, Alex.
We'll see you all in November for National Philanthropy Day. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Alex.
Okay,
That was
take
wonderful.
care.
Take care. Thanks, Ben. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.